and welcome to Teacher Talk. I'm your host, Kelly C. Let's head into the planning room and find out what the hot topic of discussion is for today. The topic of today's discussion is all about standardized assessment. I've received so many emails and phone calls from teachers all over Florida with concerns about FCAT, FCAT 2.0, and end-of-course exams. Today's show, we're privileged to be joined by 3 department experts on topics of assessment and measurement. We have Mary Jane Tappan, our K-12 Deputy Chancellor for Curriculum Instruction and Student Services, Kathy Hebda, our Deputy Chancellor for Educator Quality, and Chris Ellington, our Deputy Commissioner for the Division of Accountability, Research, and Measurement. They are here to address some of your questions and provide a better understanding of our overall assessment measuring system. Let's jump into some of our questions. Our first and most frequently asked questions is why? Why the change? Why has there been a change from FCAT to FCAT 2.0 and then, of course, the inclusion of the end-of-course exams?
It's a great question. As some of you probably already know, Florida just revised its standards. We have new next generation standards in reading, language arts, and mathematics. Those were adopted by the state in 2007, and you've been busily implementing those new standards. Now the assessment system is aligned to those standards. So the new standards are fully implemented, and this year they'll be assessed on FCAT 2.0.
So as Mary Jane said, we have new standards, and it's time to look at new assessments. And some of the differences now between the FCAT that we've been working with since the late 1990s is that we're giving these later in the year. And I think we just finished today is the last testing day. There are some makeups that are going to take place over the next few days, but we're giving them in April, which is about a month later than what we've been giving them for a number of years. So that's a very noticeable difference. We also have no performance tasks in FCAT 2.0, so we don't have any short or extended response items. That helps us, since we are giving it later in the year, we don't have as long to score the tests, and with performance tests, of course, it does take longer, as with our writing test. And just as the new standards have increased expectations for students, the tests of these new standards do as well. So there's an increase in rigor, so that we do measure the next generation standards, and the CPOMS, the standards database, includes some reference to what the expectation is for rigor for each of the benchmarks. And our tests have been written to align with those expectations. So if a standard has a high cognitive complexity rating, then you would expect on the test that there would be some items that are high challenge items, but there will also be some low challenge items and moderate challenge items as well. We also have new reporting categories on the test. So we're used to the reporting categories that we've been using for the Sunshine State standards. Well, in the next generation standards, those are different, and the reporting categories on FCAT 2.0 are also different. And all of this information is on the FCAT website, so we won't go into the details of what they are, but they are different, and I think they should align well with what the teachers are seeing in the next generation standards. Also, we're beginning to transition to computer-based testing. So we're starting this year with grade 10 math, and of course our end-of-course tests, which have to be given on computer since they're giving so late in the year. But each year we're going to bring more subjects and grade levels online, so that by 14, 15 approximately, we're going to be fully computer-based testing.
Great. Well, and you mentioned end-of-course exams, and that's another question that we've often received. Teachers want to know if the end-of-course exams will be developed for each subject that's not currently covered under FCAT, and will that have a different scale? Will those be recorded, or will those be equivalent scale scores?
Well, we are adding additional statewide end-of-course tests. Algebra 1 is our first, and we're very excited. We've finished that testing. We're going to start that testing in early May, and our initial experience with computer-based testing has gone well, so we're optimistic that this will go well as also in May. And then we're field testing biology and geometry, and we'll be rolling out history and civics over the next few years. So we do have a nice collection of statewide assessments for end of course. At the same time, we know that there's a path in the future moving towards more end of course tests so that we can have more standardized measures within classrooms, across schools, across districts. And this is part of Race to the Top effort to help fund the work of districts in developing end-of-course tests. So while the state currently doesn't have plans beyond the end-of-course tests that I listed, there is support from the state through Race to the Top money to provide resources to schools and districts to build more end-of-course tests, more grade-level tests, and that work is supported also with a team of people that have been hired here in the department that will work with districts and have already started working with instructional leaders across the state to plan for this work and plan for how the resources can be used at the district and school level.
Now, that's one thing that I hear a lot of in regards to end-of-course exams and FCAT 2.0. We know that these are aligned to the new generation Sunshine State standards. There's a lot of talk about Common Core standards. There's confusion about the two, and there's also confusion as to how am I going to test or how am I going to teach my students when my textbook is still set. You know, I didn't get renewed in my textbook, and so it's still set with the old standards, and now they're being tested on new standards. How do I get about knowing these new standards, and how am I going to teach my students with the new standards as far as the textbook, and how does that play out as my role as a teacher?
Those are great questions, and we've heard the concerns also. The latest instructional materials adoptions have included new materials in mathematics and reading language arts that do align to our next generation standards. So teachers should have the instructional materials that teach the standards that are being tested now. One of the confusing things is our discussion about Florida's adoption of the Common Core state standards. What teachers need to understand is we will not transition to those standards until we transition to Common Core assessments. So you can feel secure that the instructional materials in your classrooms, the mathematics instructional materials that were just adopted last year, the reading language arts materials that were adopted the prior year, those materials are aligned to next generation Sunshine State standards. Those are the standards that are on FCAT 2.0, so the materials should be in your classroom. Feel secure in that. If not, or if you need more resources, there's a great resource for all of you. It's Florida Standards database tool at CPOMS. If you go to CPOMS or floridastandards.org, you will find all the standards, resources to teach those standards, and also performance item tasks, how that standard is assessed on FCAT 2.0. So the implementation of the next generation Sunshine State standards and the Common Core state standards can be confusing. So you'll see the timeline, and next year we hope to start implementing the Common Core state standards in kindergarten. The following year, kindergarten and first grade, and in 13-14, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, and all the other grades start introducing them. We won't start testing the Common Core state standards till 14-15. Right now, you should have textbooks in your classrooms aligned to the next generation Sunshine State standards. We adopted the English language arts reading 2 years ago and the mathematics last year. So the materials in your classroom should match FCAT 2.0, the next generation Sunshine State standards. everyone can be implementing the Common Core literacy standards. Those are literacy standards in social studies and science, and literacy standards regarding the text complexity, making sure that what you're sharing in the classroom with students is the appropriate text complexity for the grade level you're teaching. So continue to teach the Next Generation Sunshine State Standards, particularly if you teach an assessed grade, grades 3 through 12, and will do a tiered approach to implement the Common Core state standards through the next years. So everybody will be teaching the Common Core in 13-14, and the students will be assessed on the Common Core in 14-15.
Great. Now, a lot of this concern, I think, comes from the new legislation that has said that this is going to be part of our evaluation system, and there's lots of miscommunication about this value added. Value added is kind of a formula out there that people are misconstruing as far as what does that mean for me and what does that mean in my classroom. So one of the questions we've been asked was, what is value added and how does it apply to both the FCAT 2.0 and those teachers who are giving end of course exams?
I'll start with that, and I'll talk about value added for a couple of minutes, and then if Chris wants to chime in about 2.0, that would be great. A value added calculation is a statistical model. It's a statistical calculation that seeks to isolate effects on student learning. Most often, and what Florida is using a value added calculation for, both under Race to the Top and under Senate Bill 736, is to seek to determine a teacher's effect on student learning, mostly by measuring growth. And growth is change between 2 points in time and can be longer than 2 points in time. And the calculation that Florida is working on for value added was begun under Race to the Top and will be completed through Senate Bill 736. We started with a growth committee, a student growth implementation committee. We had over 600 volunteers for 2 committees dealing with educator quality, and 300 of those were for people who wanted to volunteer for the student growth implementation committee last fall.
And those consist of teachers? There are some teachers
on that. We have
now
27 of those folks that are on the committee, and it includes teachers in all grades and subject levels represented, school principals, district administrators, both in assessment and in human resources. We have a parent representative, a business representative, higher education, colleges of education are represented on the committee. So it really, and of course it covers Florida's geographic regions and small, medium, and large districts. That's why the committee is so large. We wanted to make sure that we had a really good representation of the folks out there that would be would give us really great input on the calculation. The second thing we did was we hired expertise using Race to the Top funding. We hired national expertise to help us with this. We did a competitive procurement, and the contractor that won the bid was American Institutes of Research, or AIR, as some people know them. And they have been working with the committee to do 2 things. To first help them understand the range of value-added models that are available out there. And value-added models are used in other states and jurisdictions for a number of things. Sometimes professional development, sometimes for teacher evaluation, sometimes for performance pay and other areas. What Florida is using its value-added calculation for is for teacher evaluation purposes and principal evaluation purposes. So that we can balance, get a full evaluation and full picture of what a teacher's doing in a classroom. Both what they do on the instructional practice piece of the evaluation and how much their students learn. And again, because value added is measuring growth or change over 2 points in time or more, then it gives us a really good picture regardless of where the student starts with the teacher when he or she comes into the classroom. We're looking at how much change, how much influence the teacher can have on that student's learning. Knowing that there are many other factors that affect student learning, the statistical calculation, the reason for using value added instead of maybe a simple growth model, the way we use learning gains for school school grades, for example, is so that the calculation can help us isolate those things that really we can attribute to the teacher and give teachers credit for their contribution to student learning. So we have the two-pronged process. We have the representative committee working on this, plus we have national expertise. We think that combination is going to be the best way to approach this for Florida. Because there are statistical models out there, there is research to draw on for uses of value added and types of calculations and how they work. But it's very important to us, and we made sure this was in the Race to the Top application. And now we're very fortunate that the legislation carries us forward, that we had a calculation that really works for Florida. And so that's why the committee is important. That's why the national expertise is important. And so the contractor, AIR, started with the Student Growth Committee, as I said, and just laying out the types of models that are available, explaining those models to them. How do they work, and not so much how do they work from a mathematical standpoint,
Right.
but what are the policy implications? If I use this kind of calculation, this is what this kind of calculation seeks to do. Is that something that you all would be interested in? Those are the kind of questions they posed to the committee. So all the committee has done so far, and they've had 2 conference call meetings and a 2-day face-to-face meeting in Orlando recently. And what the committee has done so far they've not made any decisions on which model they're going to choose. But what they have done is they have given direction to the contractor. And they've given them direction in what kinds of models using Florida data they'd like to see more information on, and how those models actually perform with our student data and with our teacher data. So they've whittled down from a collection of 8 models down to a set of 3 models they want to see more information on. And they've also done a conversation about the variables. Remember I talked about
Right.
how value added seeks to isolate the teacher effects
Yes.
in this case.
Yes.
It could be school effects or other things too, but as I said, we're using this for teacher and principal evaluation. So because the model seeks to isolate those things, it also seeks to then weed out other factors that might be influential in student learning. And so what the committee has done is they have started with the 3 suggested variables that are suggested in the law, which are ELL, English Language Learner status, disability status, or ESE, as some folks call it, and attendance, student attendance. So they started with those. They went through a discussion of how those actually appear and are collected in our database, because that matters. It matters what the philosophical reason is behind wanting to look at that variable in the
Right.
calculation, but it also matters how that variable is even captured in the database. Sometimes things are not in the database, in the standard database, such as our education data warehouse, that actually can be looked at statewide, so that we have a fair model that really captures what we're doing with the FCAT and what teachers are doing with the FCAT. So they looked at those 3, and then they also looked at a list that they brainstormed and suggested from committee members of things they had us look at in the database to see how those things are reflected.
The
And then
variables, some
the
other variables.
additional variables, such as student retention. And there's the list of the full set of variables they considered is on the website, on the Race to the Top website, and you can actually watch the video from the whole 2-day meeting if you want to. All 16 hours is available. And I would encourage people at least to do that for a few minutes. Nobody, I don't think, has lots and lots of time nowadays to do anything, but one of the best things about the committee's discussion and looking through the variables and looking through the models, as we discussed, is their deliberation. We have a music teacher, we have elementary, we have ESOL, ESE teachers, principals in district, all those kind of folks that bring school board members. We have a lot of folks in that committee that have a lot of experience they bring to bear with their classrooms and their schools and their districts. And they really took a lot of time and really put things on the table that they really discussed through and deliberated through to come to their conclusions. And so far the conclusions are only what they would like to explore. That's where we are in the process. They're exploring the 3 models, they're exploring the list of variables, and then on the 19th and 20th of May, they'll come back after AIR has done those requested data runs with Florida data, and they'll provide the committee with that analysis, with the views of those 3 models, with the variables in and with the variables out. so they can see a comparison of whether or not those variables, each of those variables really matters and makes a difference, and how you measure a teacher's contribution to student learning.
Well, and I think the most important thing to clarify with that, because I've heard a lot of teachers asking about this mathematical calculation, that it's just one set calculation, is that you did mention that this is set for Florida, that this is really tailor-made for Florida and for Florida teachers, and has been put together by a number of Florida educators, people who really have an interest, a vested interest in how this evaluation is going to come about. So that's really important. And then the second part of the question, Chris, was we have FCAT 2.0, and then we have end-of-course exams. Is this evaluation, is this value-added model, can it be used for both? Can it be equivalent for both? I know we mentioned that there was a music teacher on the committee, so when she gets an end-of-course exam, is that going to be calculated, I guess they're asking, in the same manner?
Well, I think this is still part of the exploration, but you know, we are able to connect performance on, for example, grade 8 FCAT math with Algebra 1. So, you know, we can look at growth from between those 2 points in time. I think part of what we're working on right now, we are all in transition. As Kathy said, you know, this is an exploratory time. To some extent, this year for FCAT 2.0 and end-of-course tests is also very, very much of a transition year. And it's not going to fully be understood in terms of what the scores are going to look like until next year. This year, and I think this is a good time to bring this up, I mean, we do want to talk a little bit, I know, about the non-state assessments and where we are with that. But
with the state end-of-course exams and a district end-of-course exam. So, yes,
but I wanted to talk a little bit about the scoring this year for FCAT 2.0 and the end-of-course test, because this is a transition year, and as we've mentioned, these new assessments do measure more rigorous standards, and they will present a challenge. This year, because we are sort of in the gulf between, you know, FCAT and FCAT 2.0, we're using a process to link the two in order to provide information to students and their teachers about achievement level performance. But we don't have new achievement levels yet for FCAT 2.0. We're not able to do that until after we have all of the scores and performance from this year. So it won't will happen next year. So this year what we're doing is we're linking the two scores so that when results are reported this year, it's going to look very similar to last year. So we're going to use the same achievement level cut scores. We're going to use the same scale. It's going to look like FCAT 1, first generation FCAT, just for this year, until we can, in the fall, assemble groups of educators, teachers, and principals and others to work with us to set new achievement level cut scores. Because we know those.
So in the future there will be a different set of achievement levels.
Correct.
But at this time, the scores coming back to us this summer are going to have the same achievement levels.
Right. So even though the test is testing more rigorous expectations for students, this year we won't see. I know there's concern that the scores are just going to, you know, belly out. But this year, and I don't expect, since teachers I know are very focused on teaching the next generation standards, we may see a dip next year, but we won't see that necessarily this year, because we are linking the scales, we're linking the achievement level expectations. So this year's achievement is going to be reported on the old FCAT scale with the old achievement level expectations. And then in the fall, we'll set new expectations, and that will also provide the information for the next step in working through the value-added approach for state assessments.
Okay.
Thanks. And I just would add to that, too, before Chris talks about the district end-of-course assessments, just to reiterate what Chris just said, that we are working through a process of developing value-added models. Our first direction is to develop a value-added model that everybody will use. It's associated with FCAT. So FCAT 2.0 is the test this year. We're building the model based on the historical data. We'll add FCAT 2.0 results to it this summer. But when we talk about Algebra 1 and the other state assessments, those models will be developed when we have 2 years of results for those things. We'll start this year, and we'll work into those things as they become available. So the first thing we're starting with is FCAT.
So as Kathy mentioned, and Kelly, you were asking about the other end-of-course tests, and I mentioned earlier that the Race to the Top resources are going to provide support for districts and schools in building these assessments. We're working right now to begin to design what these resources will look like and what the technology platform will look like that will house all of these test items and tests. And we have a committee as well that includes educators and parents and other stakeholder groups that are helping us to design this system. And then we will, through a competitive process, we'll get a contractor to begin working with us to develop these items in the technology platform. The goal is that by 13-14, if not sooner, we'll begin to provide resources to schools and districts to work together to build tests that can be used in their districts and schools to measure the next generation standards or other standards for other subject areas and grades. There's also this concern about measuring subject areas that are not traditionally measured through standardized assessments, such as music and visual performing arts and so forth. So we've been working with the Florida Organization of Instructional Leaders, and through Race to the Top funds, we're going to provide grants to collections of districts to work together with professional organizations and teachers to design and write test items and design tests that teachers are part of. So that is part of what's proving the validity of these measures, that teachers have said, this is what I teach, this is important, and this is what I want to be held accountable for, and what's fair for me. So teachers are going to be involved in this process of designing and building these tests, and we'll be providing resources to districts that will allow them to do that. So by the end of our Race to the Top window in time, the resources will be there and the work will have begun on these new assessments.
Now, along that same line, I get a lot of questions also on when we take FCAT and FCAT 2.0, it's very secured and we have to read, and if you're going to leave the room, you have to sign out. Everything's very secured so that we can validate any. There's a list of reasons why something has to be invalid, a test should be invalidated. And the question is, when they're giving an end-of-course exam, is there that same security? Will they all take secondary classes? Will they all take Algebra 1 at the same time? So period 1 isn't giving answers to period 5. Are there different ones? You know, how will there be a script? And is that different between the state gathered end-of-course exams and the district gathered end-of-course exams?
Well, certainly the Algebra 1 end-of-course test, which will be given during 3 weeks in May, there will be the same kinds of expectations for test administration procedures and making sure everybody understands, both from a student level and a teacher level, what's expected. Districts have probably, if they haven't already, they'll be doing training for the district and school test administrators. We've had a number of webinars to help everybody understand from the district level what's expected. So the district Algebra 1, the Algebra 1 end-of-course test will have these requirements, and we will also be, as we do with FCAT 2.0 and FCAT, we'll be analyzing results as well to make sure that there aren't any anomalies that might be attributed to people trying to take shortcuts, whether it's students or teachers. So we are going to be doing some security analysis